Hi, Steve from Brownells and Mike from Sons of Liberty Gunworks with another edition of Smyth Busters. And today, Mike, we're going to look at small parts kits for the AR-15, all created equal, no difference. Come on. They're just small little parts. What's the big deal?
It's a pretty big deal. And no, they're not all created equal. Having studied this platform and just looked at thousands and thousands of rifles, you start to realize that why guns fail or work has little to do with like the main parts. It's not because your rail fell off or something, right? Usually if you see a stoppage or an issue with the gun, it's that $2 spring that nobody really ever talks about, and it is those kind of small parts. That's the difference between, I think, a gun that works really well and a gun that doesn't. These small parts, they're not all made equal, right? So first thing that I look at sometimes is what is the spring material? If you have some of that 302, 303, that can't really be heat treated, and so it's not going to have the life of like a 17.7 type of spring or something that can be, which is what the proper spec is on that. You look at triggers, fire control groups, even in the mil-spec, if you will, a trigger can be anywhere between 5.5 to 9 pounds and still be technically in spec, right? And it doesn't really talk about travel or grit or cleanliness or that kind of that crisp, predictable break. It doesn't discuss that stuff. So, one of the things that we did, I know BCM, Psionics, a bunch of other brands, they took, good mil-spec triggers, they cleaned them up, and where you're winning the trigger lottery every time you play, it's always going to be a predictable, about 6 pounds, clean, crisp break, really positive reset, heavy hammer strike. Again, that's another place where springs come into play is on that hammer spring. Are you getting adequate hammer strike to ensure primer detonation? And it goes on. I mean, even detents, if you have a takedown pin or a pivot pin and you don't have a real positive engagement when it's in those positions and it's kind of squishy, there could be issues with where that detent sits in that pin.
Oh, definitely.
Or even how fast detents wear because they were made of the incorrect material. A lot of the ones on the civilian market are zinc coated as opposed to cadmium, with the what it's supposed to be. And then moving on, one of the biggest problems that we see in small parts kits out there is that bolt catch or that bolt stop, right?
That's a high stress part.
That's a high stress part. It's stopping stopping that bolt with all that mass and energy from the action spring pushing that thing, and it needs to cam up and stop that bolt. Well, if that's not made of the appropriate material or the appropriate processes, we see those things break all the time, and now you have a pretty significant piece of debris bouncing around in the gun. That's an issue.
Right.
So these things are not all created equal, and the funny thing is a lot of times the price difference between the real stuff and some of the not real stuff is so negligible that it's a really, that's not where I would save an extra $8 or something if you could just get something good. And I think our stuff's pretty solid, and there's a couple other brands I think are really doing it right, and not all small parts are created equal.
Right, and they do have a lot of more stress than one would think. Even the firing pin retainer pin, for example. You can't go down to the hardware store and just get a cotter pin and put in there. It won't last very long.
It won't last.
I've tried it.
It won't last very long, and the stuff has it has a purpose and it has a spec of how something should be made. Materials, processes, testing, so on and so forth, finishes. You need to adhere to that stuff, and if you do, you're going to be pretty happy with the performance of the gun.
Even if they use the right material, in some cases the QC isn't there, so like you have to drive your pivot pin out with a hammer or something to get it past the detent?
Yeah, exactly. So we reject quite a bit of stuff. I mean, we have several levels of QC, and I think most of your better performance brands do this. And when you're dealing with large numbers of anything, the QC process becomes critical.
Right.
So if you're buying stuff from a reputable manufacturer, they have great QC, but ultimately you, the builder, if you're doing this stuff at home, you're the final level of QC, and you want to lay that stuff out, really inspect it. And if, like you said, if you find yourself having to beat on something with a hammer, like a trigger or hammer pin or something else, stop. There's something wrong. That's not how it was designed to be installed or uninstalled. So if you find yourself having to struggle with the installation of something, make sure it's in spec.
Yep, definitely. Well, Mike, I'd call that myth busted.
Yeah.
So there you have it. If you feel differently, if you've had trouble with kits, let us know in the comments. We'd like to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time with another edition of Smyth Busters.